No intimacy until you agree to an open relationship. That's what she said. Just like that. Like she was asking if he wanted the chicken or the fish. No warning, no prelude. Just a bomb dropped with the nonchalance of someone deciding which Netflix show to half-watch while scrolling their phone. I was holding a screwdriver when she said it. My hands didn't even twitch. I looked up from the watch I was working on. An old Seiko from the 70s with a cracked crystal and a heartbeat that still ticked, barely, and stared at her. Clarissa stood in the doorway of my workshop with 2 glasses of wine. She hadn't stepped foot in there in over a year. She always called it your little cave. Now here she was in a silky blouse and that performative smile, like she was hosting a damn TED Talk on modern marriages. I didn't say a word, just stood up, calmly, and pointed at the door. Not a yell, not a flinch, just that. She laughed. That tight little laugh she does when she thinks I'm being sensitive. Come on, don't be dramatic, she said, taking a step forward like she was going to hand me the wine. I kept my finger pointed, not at her face, not with anger, just a gesture, like an umpire signaling the runner is out. She stopped walking. Her laugh turned into a single awkward exhale. The wineglass in her hand shifted a little. She blinked. There it was. The shift. The smirk was gone. Let me say something real quick. I'm not a saint. I'm not the perfect husband. I snore. I tinker with watches when I should probably be helping with dishes. I don't remember what she wore to her friend's birthday last March, but for 28 years I showed up. I paid off the house. I drove her to her appointments after her surgery. I walked the dog when she was too tired. And maybe I missed a few signals along the way, but I never expected this. You spend your whole damn adult life thinking you know someone. Then they waltz into your sanctuary with a wineglass and a nuclear threat and expect you to nod along like it's a yoga retreat suggestion. You know what's funny? More than 97% of people who listen to stories like this never subscribe. But if you're one of the ones still reading, and if you feel this, if it scratches something behind your ribs, you might want to. That's how we keep this going. And trust me, it does get worse before it gets better. Clarissa didn't leave the garage right away. She just stood there, looking at my hand. I didn't move it, didn't lower it, just held it steady, like it was made of stone. After a full minute, she turned, muttering something like, "We'll talk later," and left. The door clicked shut. I sat back down and looked at the watch. The second hand had stopped. And I swear to God, that silence was louder than any scream she could have thrown at me. That night, I didn't sleep in the bedroom, didn't even go upstairs. I stayed in the workshop, not because I was scared, but because I didn't want to breathe the same air. I opened the old fridge, cracked a beer, and stared at the workbench. Not thinking, just observing. The weight of what she said didn't hit like a punch. It settled like sand in the bloodstream. You know what I mean? Heavy, quiet, lethal over time. By morning, she was back to her routine. Making coffee, talking to the dog in that high-pitched voice like nothing happened. She didn't mention the night before, didn't bring up the offer. She just acted like everything was normal. And that's when I knew this wasn't a bluff. This wasn't some impulsive joke gone too far. She'd thought about it, rehearsed it, chosen the timing, practiced the pitch. The thing is, I'd already been noticing the cracks. The late-night trips to clear her head. The smudged lipstick after yoga. The shift in tone when she talked to me, like I was a coworker who left a light on. I noticed the way she changed her phone settings so texts didn't preview on the lock screen. I noticed how she suddenly cared about matching underwear again. After 2 decades of worn-out cotton, and who's gonna see it anyway? I noticed everything. I just hadn't said anything. But now the chessboard was open, and I had the first move. What she didn't know, what she never considered, was that I'd already started planning for something like this. Because when a woman starts weaponizing affection, you don't argue. You don't plead. You don't negotiate with a hostage taker. You get quiet. You observe. You collect. And eventually, you flip the board. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of eggs and that lemony detergent she uses on the counters. She was humming, like the night before had been a dream, like she hadn't just pitched me on screwing other men while I wait in the yard like some neutered golden retriever. She greeted me with a morning, honey, that bounced too high. She had on that ridiculous apron with cartoon olives on it. One of those funny gifts she used to love giving me back when we still had inside jokes. She placed a cup of coffee on the table like she was hosting a 1950s cooking show. I nodded, sat, and took a sip, and made a decision. Clarissa had forgotten about the key. Hell, I'd nearly forgotten about it too. It was the kind of thing you only remember in moments like this, when the weight of a betrayal squeezes everything else out of your skull, and the one clear memory that surfaces is a small, brass key in the junk drawer beneath the expired coupons and takeout menus. It was taped to the bottom of a notepad that said, "To do." Eventually. I waited until she went upstairs, heard the shower start. Then I walked out back, into the shed. We'd used the filing cabinet for taxes back in the early years, when we still filed jointly and kept paper records like normal people. She stopped using it around the time everything went digital. But I didn't. The lock clicked open with a satisfying snap, and I pulled out the drawer that stuck slightly on the left side. The top folder was labeled, Utilities, 2005. The next, Bank, Closed Accounts. Behind that, Phones, AT&T. Bingo. And under that, wedged between two old cable bills and a pamphlet on Roth IRAs, was the burner. An old Android phone, scuffed on the corners, the kind you could get for $30 at a gas station and no one would blink. I plugged it into the wall. The charging screen blinked to life. 8% battery. Just enough. The notifications lit up one by one. Not recent, months old. Maybe longer. But still there. And not wiped. The wallpaper was a picture of our backyard. Cropped so I wasn't in it. Just the patio table and the wine glasses. I opened the messaging app. One thread pinned to the top. John. No last name. Just John. The conversation was casual. Intimate. Familiar in that way that can only be earned through repeated transgressions. The kind of ease you get with someone you've lied with. Not to. With. And there it was. John. Tonight was perfect. You deserve this. Clarissa. I needed that. I hate lying, but I can't stop. John. Let me know if he suspects anything. Clarissa. Please. He's still fixing old watches and pretending he's interesting. I didn't flinch. Didn't throw the phone. Just read. Scanned. Absorbed. She used to compliment my patience. You never jump to conclusions, she'd say. I always thought that was admiration. Now I see it was strategy. She counted on me not jumping. On me sitting back while she played her game behind frosted glass. The text spanned 6 months. Not daily but consistent. Lunch meetups. Hotel receipts. Shared passwords. A joke about me using DuckDuckGo and still not seeing the signs. I even found a selfie of them at some art exhibit. She said she was volunteering that day. John was younger. Late 30s, maybe. Khakis and loafers type. No wedding ring in the photos. His smile was too wide. The kind of man who says chief in meetings and thinks it's charming. There was no mention of love. No declarations. Just collusion. That's the word that came to mind. They weren't star-crossed lovers. They were co-conspirators. Building a narrative together where I was the oblivious relic polishing brass while they giggled under hotel sheets I paid for. I put the phone down. Took a breath. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was a quiet finality. Like when a doctor finally confirms the thing you already feared. A tumor you already felt. But now it has a name. Now it's real. I looked around the shed. Same dust. Same tools. Nothing had changed except everything had. I placed the phone back in the cabinet. Took a photo of the messages on my own phone. No cloud sync. No digital trail. Just screenshots on an SD card that I'd slip into the lining of my old jacket later. Clarissa was still in the shower when I walked back in. She yelled from upstairs, asking if I wanted to go out to brunch. Her voice was cheerful, innocent, practiced. I stared up at the ceiling. No, I called back. Not hungry, but I was lying. I was starving, just not for food. I was starving for truth, and I'd just taken the first bite. There's a reason I didn't use our home Wi-Fi. I wasn't paranoid. I was precise. Clarissa had a habit of logging into my laptop under the guise of just checking something. She wasn't tech-savvy, but she was nosy. And I wasn't about to hand her my playbook while she thought I was still sitting on the bench. The local library was quiet that Thursday morning. A couple retirees scrolling on desktop computers. A kid with headphones watching cartoons in a corner. And a woman reading a romance novel like it held national secrets. Perfect. I picked terminal number 4. Clean machine. Fresh session. I slipped my little USB into the side and booted it up. That thing had lived in my toolbox for 5 years, masquerading as a firmware installer for my label printer. Inside, nothing but financial bookmarks, anonymized browsing tools, and a spreadsheet I'd started populating back when Clarissa's work, retreats, started happening every other weekend. I logged into the joint investment portal. Clarissa hadn't touched it in years. Said she trusted me with the boring stuff. But that account was still active. Still connected to the brokerage we opened together in 2003, back when we were planning for retirement, not nuclear divorce. The portfolio was intact. Some bonds, a few mid-cap funds, a small holding in a real estate REIT that was finally climbing. I almost smiled at that. I hovered over the Statements tab, preparing to download the quarterly PDFs. That's when I saw it. Another tab. Same site. Different name. One I hadn't seen in years. Clarissa Monroe. Her maiden name. She only used that name for two things as far as I knew. The title on her old art portfolio, and her high school Facebook profile that she never deactivated. Seeing it here on a financial platform was like discovering a secret room in your own house. I clicked. It asked for login credentials. And that's where past Martin helped present Martin. Back when she used to handwrite passwords on sticky notes, I'd saved a few. Out of habit. Not suspicion. Just to remember. One of them was the name of her first dog, plus her graduation year. I typed it in. Access granted. The dashboard opened like a confession booth. There it was. A separate investment account. Different portfolio. Same institution. Transfers coming in regularly about once a month. Traced back to our joint checking. The description field always the same. Auto alloc. Bullshit. I dug deeper. There were deposits going back over 2 years. They started small, $500 here, $750 there. Then they grew. $1,500. $2,000. The last one, $3,600. All set up as automated transfers from our household account. Masked to look like insurance payments. Except we didn't have any new policies. The statement export feature was easy. I downloaded everything from the last 36 months. Pulled transaction histories, account changes, beneficiary listings. She'd listed herself as sole owner, with a secondary contact, J. Caldwell. John. Full name now. John Caldwell. I didn't know if she was planning to run, to cash out, or just build a safety net while screwing me blind. But what mattered was this. The rope she thought she was using to climb out. She'd tied it to the foundation of our life together. I hit print. Walked over to the old clunky machine in the corner that sounded like it had emphysema. The pages spat out one by one. 48 in total. As I gathered them, a guy with a Bluetooth earpiece and a cup of gas station coffee glanced at the stack. His eyes scanned the header on one. He let out a low whistle. That's a hell of a betrayal. I looked at him. Yeah. I said. Yes, sir. It is. He didn't ask more. Just nodded, like men sometimes do when the details don't matter but the pain is understood. I slid the papers into a folder and walked out of the library. The wind had picked up. Sharp cold. The kind that bites the inside of your ears and makes everything feel more real. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was ready. Because now I had numbers. I had paper. I had proof. Let her play coy. Let her smile through brunch and pretend nothing was wrong. She had no idea I just found the seam in her mask. And the next time I pulled, the whole thing was going to tear. I waited until after midnight. Clarissa was asleep. Fake asleep, if I had to guess. Her phone was face down on the charger, notifications silenced. She'd started doing that 6 months ago, calling it digital detox. Ironic, considering the number of digital footprints she was leaving behind. I sat in the garage, door slightly cracked for the night air. The smell of old oil and pine mulch thick around me. The burner phone was in my palm. Her old one, the archive. The one with his number saved under John. No emoji. No code name. No disguise. Just John. The man she trusted enough to photograph her in bedsheets I didn't recognize, in hotels I didn't book. The man who said, "You deserve this," while I was probably downstairs folding towels and wondering why she didn't come back with the lemon scones I asked for. I scrolled up through their messages. The most recent thread was brief. John. Can't wait to see you Sunday. Same room? Clarissa. Same room. Same rules. He doesn't suspect a thing. I read it twice. Then, without much ceremony, I hit call. The line rang twice. Then a voice. Male. Younger. Confident in the way men are before they've ever had to rebuild a life from rubble. John, he said. Casual. Expecting someone else. Maybe her. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't clear my throat. Just said, she told me to accept an open relationship. I declined. But I figured you'd like to know what else she hasn't told you. There was silence. Not even static. Just the kind of silence that cuts the air like a scalpel. He hung up. No questions. No denial. Just a fast, surgical sever. I didn't move. I set the phone down on the bench beside me, next to a wrench, a used sanding block, and the melted stub of a citronella candle. The clock read 12:16 a.m. 10 minutes passed. Then the screen lit up. Unknown number. Just one word. Meet. I waited. Let him sweat. Let the anticipation stew. Then I tapped out a reply. Tomorrow. My house. 7 a.m. I stared at the screen. No reply. Didn't need one. John would come. The kind of man who thinks he's winning always comes when he thinks the game has changed. He didn't know yet he was just a pawn. Worse, he didn't know he wasn't the only one being played. This wasn't about confronting him with fists or screaming accusations. I didn't care how many times he'd been in my bed. That wasn't the point. The point was leverage, control, power. I wanted John to look me in the eyes while I dismantled the fantasy Clarissa sold him. I wanted him to realize that she was never going to choose him, that he was a distraction from her own boredom, that I wasn't some passive old fool polishing watches while the world passed me by. I was the man watching, listening, planning, and now, acting. I pulled out an old legal pad and started sketching. Not doodles, diagrams, flowcharts, timeline blocks, evidence categories, financial trace paths, names, dates, receipt notations. My handwriting had always been precise, left-leaning, clean, but now it took on the shape of something colder. Surgical. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. I was reclaiming my name from the story she told behind my back. I was reclaiming my dignity from the narrative where I was too boring or too quiet. I was reclaiming my own damn house from the ghost of a marriage she set on fire, smiling all the while. At 1:07 a.m., I closed the pad, poured myself 1 inch of bourbon, and toasted to the man I used to be, the one who would have cried, the one who would have begged. He was dead, and in his place stood a man holding the strings, watching the puppets dance, counting down the hours to a morning that would end any illusion left between us. 7 hours from now, the door would open, and John would walk into the quietest ambush of his life. I cleaned the guest room like it was a crime scene, not because I wanted it to look good, because I wanted it sterile, neutral, no framed photos, no sentimental furniture, just blank walls, a floor lamp, and the hum of inevitability. 3 chairs, one facing 2. Took me a few minutes to get the spacing right. The solo chair needed to be closer to the window, not too close to the hallway door, where someone might feel they had an exit. The other 2 sat side by side, not touching, but near enough to be uncomfortable for people pretending not to know each other well. I adjusted the height of each one. No detail was accidental. I laid out the folders on the desk I'd dragged in from the attic. It was ugly, scratched, and square. Perfect. Cold surface, hard edges, unforgiving corners. No curves. No softness. I wanted them to feel it when they reached out. Folder 1. Financial records. Every transfer Clarissa made from our joint account to her phantom portfolio. Every statement from Clarissa Monroe. Notes on the frequency. Highlighted summaries. And the kicker. A screenshot of the account's secondary contact. John Caldwell. His name right there in black and white. Folder 2. Messages and photos. Screenshots from the burner phone. Dated. Labeled. A couple of the more explicit texts printed in larger font like art pieces. Not for shock. For emphasis. A mirror held up. The art of their own words. Framed in my silence. Folder 3. Timeline of deception. This one was surgical. A spreadsheet broken down into columns. Date. Event. Claimed reason, actual activity, associated evidence. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was an autopsy. Clinical. Unemotional. The kind of thing you'd hand to a forensic accountant before a divorce trial. I put a sticky note on each folder with one word. Read. Then I walked to the kitchen and placed 2 mugs on the table. Ceramic. Plain. One had a tiny chip on the rim. I gave that one John's seat. In front of each mug, I placed a small folded napkin and a pen. The notepad was already there. I'd used one of Clarissa's from her old office drawer. The cover read, "What's meant for me won't miss me." I smiled at the irony, then scratched it out with a black marker and wrote Clarissa in block letters across the front. I poured water into the kettle, filled the carafe and left it unplugged. No coffee. Let them stare at the potential. Let them feel the absence. Let the unfinished cup sting worse than a shout. Before heading back to the guest room, I walked past the wall clock in the hallway. I reached up and carefully moved the minute hand forward 10 minutes. I didn't want them to trust the time. Control the minutes and you control perception. Make someone think they're late and they'll panic. Make them think they're early and they'll underestimate you. Back in the guest room, I checked the placement of the folders one last time. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out something small. The old cufflink she gave me on our 10th anniversary. Just one. I'd lost the other years ago. It had our initials engraved in script, hers above mine. I placed it in front of the center chair. A quiet symbol. Not a memory. A relic. An artifact of a partnership that once existed, before she tried to turn it into an arrangement. And then I sat in the single chair. The one facing the others. I practiced. Not what I'd say, how I'd say it. The tone. The pacing. The silence between sentences. The controlled stillness. The kind of silence that screams louder than any insult. I rehearsed leaning back slightly, staring directly, not blinking. This wasn't going to be a fight. Fights are messy. Fights are emotional. This was a performance. Precise, orchestrated reveal. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was trying to make them see themselves. And that takes planning. That takes patience. That takes a blueprint. Clarissa made fettuccine that night. From scratch. Even used the pasta machine I bought her 5 years ago that she once called a waste of counter space. She dusted off a recipe card, tied her hair back in a silk scarf, and lit 2 candles like we were starring in a second-chance rom-com neither of us had auditioned for. "Big day tomorrow," she said casually, handing me a glass of Cabernet. Her nails were freshly painted. She wore that sage green blouse she used to save for gallery openings, the one that hugged just enough to remind me of the woman I married. And now, the woman I didn't recognize. I nodded. Very big. She smiled like I'd passed some kind of test. The dining table had a floral runner. New. Not her style, which meant it was probably picked by someone else, maybe a boutique clerk or John. That thought didn't sting anymore. It just sat there, like wallpaper. "So," she said between bites, "I was thinking we should plan a trip. Just us. Something spontaneous. Clean slate, you know?" She twirled the noodles, grinning at her own suggestion like it had no weight, like nothing had happened. Maybe Santa Fe. I almost laughed. Instead, I took a sip of wine and chewed thoughtfully. "You've always liked the desert," I said. She raised her glass. "To new chapters." Clinked mine. Didn't say a word. Just watched her drink. She talked about pottery classes. A friend who got divorced and moved to a cabin. Reinvention came up twice. She was trying so hard to steer the narrative back to something salvageable. Something she could still pretend to shape. She didn't know the clay had already hardened. She didn't know I had John arriving at 7 a.m. She didn't know the folders were printed, labeled, and staged in the guest room like exhibits in a silent trial. And most of all, she didn't know that every word she spoke was being mentally catalogued by a man who no longer cared if she meant them. I played along, nodded at the right beats, laughed once when she told a story about spilling coffee on her keyboard. I even touched her hand when she reached across the table. Just once. For the illusion. She looked relieved. After dinner, she insisted on doing the dishes. I let her. I stood in the doorway, watched her hum to herself, back turned, sleeves rolled. It should have felt intimate, familiar. Didn't. Felt like watching someone else's life. She kissed my cheek before heading upstairs. "Don't stay up too late with your clocks," she said. "I won't," I replied. She paused at the stairs, then added, "You know, I'm glad we talked the other day. I think it opened something. You're not as rigid as you used to be." I nodded again. "You're right," I said. "I've changed." She smiled and went up. I waited 15 minutes, gave her time to settle into the performance of sleep. She always started with fake even breaths, then the real ones. I knew the rhythm. Then I moved. The folder was already prepared. Not one from the guest room. A separate one, lighter. Just enough for a prelude. I walked quietly upstairs. The hallway light was off. Her bedroom door cracked open. She always kept it slightly ajar. Said she hated the feeling of being sealed in. I stood in the doorway for a beat. Watched her shape under the covers. One hand curled near her face. The room smelled like lavender and heat. I placed the folder on the nightstand. White cover. Centered text in small block font. For when you wake up. No threats. No accusations. Just an invitation. Inside, a single sheet. It was a photo. Her and John. From the burner phone. Taken at a bar she told me was an office mixer. Her hand on his thigh. His finger tracing the stem of her martini glass. Her face glowing. I'd written nothing on it. No note. No explanation. Just the image. Below it, a second paper. A printout of the first automated transfer to Clarissa Monroe. $750. Not much, but enough to start the unraveling. I turned off the hallway light on my way down. Poured myself another inch of bourbon. Sat in the living room chair she hated, the one that creaked when you shifted weight. I sat perfectly still and waited for the sun to rise. The knock came at exactly 7 a.m. Not a nervous knock. Not hesitant. Just 3 firm raps like a man who assumed the house already belonged to him. I opened the door. John stood there in a crisp button-down and jeans that tried a little too hard to look casual. Aviator sunglasses. A travel mug. Clean-shaven. Confident in that particular way men get when they've been sleeping with someone else's wife and haven't yet considered that maybe, just maybe, they're not the only ones in on the joke. "Martin?" he asked. Tone neutral but with a note of amusement. Like this was all going to be a polite, awkward conversation that ended with a handshake and maybe a shared laugh about the complexities of modern relationships. "She's upstairs," I said, stepping aside. He nodded once and walked in. John didn't notice the guest room immediately. He clocked the coffee on the table first. 2 mugs, steam rising from the untouched carafe I'd plugged in 20 minutes ago. His eyes flicked to the notepad labeled Clarissa, then to the hallway where the guest room door was ajar, just enough to see the chairs inside. Then he noticed the folders. He stopped walking. That was the first break in his rhythm. Subtle. Just a half-step hesitation like someone adjusting their footing on unexpectedly uneven ground. I said nothing, just gestured toward the open door. He entered the room and sat, without invitation, in the chair I'd left slightly off-center. He placed his travel mug down and leaned back like this was a negotiation. "I take it you've had time to process things?" he said carefully. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned and walked to the foot of the stairs. "Clarissa," I called up, calm, even. "We have company." There was a pause, a long one, then soft footsteps, deliberately casual, like she was deciding which version of herself to wear downstairs. She emerged in a navy robe, hair brushed but still damp, and makeup half applied, just enough to feign surprise but not enough to suggest she'd been rushing. Her smile was ready. She probably expected a conversation about boundaries, about grown-up choices, maybe even a reconciliation offer wrapped in progressive language. Then she saw John, and me, and the folders. Her smile collapsed in stages, first in the corners, then in the eyes and finally in the jaw, which locked like a failing hinge. She looked at me first, then John, then back to me. "What is this?" she asked, voice tight. I didn't raise it. I didn't glare. I just pointed to the chair across from John, the one facing both of us. "Let's talk." She hesitated. Then she stepped into the room, each footfall heavier than the last, and sat down without taking her eyes off the folders. Her hands curled in her lap. She didn't touch the mug. John cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Martin, I think we all need to approach this like adults. No need for dramatics." I turned to him. "You're sitting in a chair in another man's house," I said, "next to the woman you've been screwing behind his back for over a year. I'd say the dramatics started long before I made coffee." He looked away. Clarissa leaned forward. "Look, we never meant to." I held up a hand. "Don't insult me." She flinched. I picked up folder 1, laid it in front of her. "Financial records," I said. "Every transfer you made to that little side fund of yours, from our joint account, disguised as insurance payments. Every one traced and documented." I placed folder 2 in front of John. "Messages, photos, including one of you two at the Carrington Hotel on February 11th. She told me she was visiting her sister in Tacoma." John's smugness evaporated like cheap cologne. Clarissa didn't move, didn't breathe. I placed folder 3 between them. Timeline of deception. Everything. The excuses. The lies. The overlapping cover stories. Then I leaned back, just enough to let the chair creak. Neither of them reached for the folders. Clarissa was the first to speak. barely above a whisper. Martin, what is this supposed to accomplish? I smiled, but there was nothing behind it. Clarity. John stood abruptly. This is a setup, he muttered, pacing now. You trying to shame us? Is that it? You want some kind of confession? Look, I care about her. And she was unhappy. You can't blame someone for wanting more. I raised an eyebrow. Are you asking me to feel sorry for the man who bought a woman who was already bought and paid for? He opened his mouth to reply. Didn't. Clarissa reached for the folder with trembling fingers. She opened it. Saw the first line. September 3rd. Auto Alec. $1,500. Memo. Vest ADJPMT. Her shoulders dropped. She flipped a few pages. Found the matching messages in folder 2. Her voice cracked. John, you said none of this would come out. You said it was private. John stared at her. He called me. You didn't say he knew everything. She turned back to me. Why now? Why bring him here? Why not just confront me? Because you didn't cheat on me, I said. You built a whole second life with him. I figured he deserved to see what you really are. In your full, unfiltered light. Clarissa looked like she wanted to scream. Or cry. Or run. She did none of those. She sat. And for the first time in years, she said nothing. I stood. This isn't a negotiation, I said. This is a funeral. For the story you both told yourselves. The one where I was too dull, too slow, too safe to ever matter. John finally found his voice again. So what now? You gonna try to ruin us? Post this online. I shook my head. No, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for truth. You wanted freedom, right? I pointed at the folders. There it is. I turned and walked out. Left them in that cold, bright guest room. 2 characters sitting in the wreckage of their own rewritten fairy tale. And I didn't look back. The silence that followed my exit didn't last long. I waited just outside the guest room door. Not eavesdropping, monitoring. Measuring breath patterns, foot shuffles, chair creaks. Listening for how fast panic sets in when oxygen gets replaced with consequence. 30 seconds in, Clarissa's voice cracked through the air. Martin. I stepped back into the room, slow and composed, like a surgeon returning to the OR after letting the anesthesia settle. Let's continue. They both looked up. John's arms were crossed now, his mug untouched. Clarissa sat rigid, hands still resting on folder 2, as if it might bite her. I gestured to the center of the table. Let's make sure we're all clear on what's in front of us. I reached out and tapped each folder one by one. Folder 1, I said, slow and deliberate. Your financial deceit. Clarissa blinked, eyes already red. I continued. Folder 2, your affair. The messages, the images, the timelines. Her fingers twitched. I moved to the last. Folder 3 is the part I'm most proud of. It contains a legal memorandum, notarized yesterday, outlining how and why both of you walk away with nothing if this goes public. John finally spoke, tone clipped. You're bluffing. I smiled. Try me. Clarissa opened folder 2 and started flipping through the pages. Page 3. A photo of her in room 408 at the Delmore Inn. Legs curled under her, champagne in hand. Page 5. A receipt with her signature and a timestamp matching one of the texts. John leaned forward to peek, but she pulled the folder closer, angling it away like a child caught reading someone else's diary. Her face tightened. You told me these hotels didn't leave a trail, she whispered, eyes not leaving the receipt. John shot her a glare. He called me. Clarissa turned to him sharply. What? John threw his hands up. He called. Yesterday. Told me you gave him the green light on an open relationship, but that wasn't the real story. I didn't know he had all this. I thought you said he never checks the accounts. Her face drained of color so fast I thought she might pass out. You weren't supposed to answer, she said, voice rising. And you weren't supposed to lie to me, he snapped back. I cleared my throat, just once, and the room fell silent again. This isn't a couples therapy session, I said. This is the part where you both realize the fantasy you built. This makeshift world you stitched together in motels and text bubbles isn't just over. It's radioactive. Clarissa turned to me. What do you want from us? I don't want anything from you, I said. I want you both to understand what happens next. I opened folder 3 and slid out a single-page document. The moment I found out, I started building the record. Not just texts and finances. Patterns. I spoke to 2 of your coworkers, people you didn't even realize you'd involved, and I compiled all of it into an affidavit of financial manipulation and misconduct. She squinted. Misconduct? You used joint marital assets to fund a separate, concealed investment account. You used household money to pay for hotel rooms during your affair. That's misappropriation. And if I file this publicly, I tapped the page again. Your assets are frozen. Divorce goes nuclear. You're dragged into court with a full paper trail. And your lovely boyfriend here, I nodded at John, ends up subpoenaed. He looked at her now with something between suspicion and disgust. Did you really use his money to take me to hotels? Clarissa didn't answer. I leaned in. You wanted freedom, Clarissa. Well, now you have it. Just not the kind you planned for. She opened her mouth, then shut it. Then finally, her hand dropped from the folder, and she collapsed into the chair like the air had been sucked from her bones. No more righteous indignation. No more smug giggles. Just silence and the rustling of paper. John stood, pacing again. You went behind my back just like you did with him. Jesus. She looked up like a ghost rising. I did it for us. You did it for yourself. His voice was flat now, dull. I watched her face shift. That moment when someone realizes the plan, the grand seduction, the reinvention of themselves as the brave, open-hearted one. It's all been stripped. Not by screaming, not by violence, but by precision. I leaned back, crossed my legs. Here's what happens next, I said. You both leave. Today. Clarissa, you'll sign a preliminary separation agreement. It includes a clause stating you forfeit any claim to joint assets post-dating your first concealed transfer. The documents are with my attorney. John opened his mouth. I didn't let him speak. As for you, John, I've already contacted your employer's ethics board. Not with accusations, just questions. You'll want to make sure you're ahead of that. His face twitched. I'll be giving you 30 minutes to collect yourselves. Then I'd like you both out of my home. Clarissa opened her mouth. Maybe to beg, maybe to lie again. I didn't care. I stood up, leaving the folders on the table. You wanted freedom? I said again. Congratulations. You're free-falling. Then I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me. They didn't follow me out of the room. For once, they had nothing to say. I let them stew for 5 full minutes. Not to be cruel, just to let silence do what yelling never could. Let the weight of consequence settle in their lungs like smoke in a sealed room. I wanted them breathing it, coughing on it, understanding it was theirs. Then I returned, calmly, without drama, a single manila envelope in my hand. I placed it on the table without a word. Clarissa stared at it like it was ticking. John squinted. What now? I sat, unclipped the top, slid out 3 documents, placed each one with deliberate care on the table between us. The first was on thick paper, legal format. Divorce papers, I said, voice quiet, pre-signed by me, dated this morning, filed electronically at 6:01 a.m., witnessed, tracked, real. Clarissa reached for it like it might bite her. The second was lighter, a single page, 3 highlighted lines, legal letterhead, asset freeze notice, I continued. My attorney filed the hold request yesterday after verifying the transfers from our joint accounts. You'll find that all accounts you used to access, both joint and phantom, are locked pending review of financial misconduct. Clarissa's mouth opened, but I held up a hand. There's more. The third page was the smallest. I tapped it gently. This is a notarized affidavit you signed. Remember? That little refinancing document I slid into the pile last fall? You didn't read it. You just wanted me to stop asking about the tax forms. I smiled, small and cold. But what you actually signed was a financial statement affirming sole responsibility for any unauthorized transfer of household funds for undisclosed investment purposes. She stared at it, eyes darting over her own handwriting. Her signature, the seal. That's fraud, John muttered. Clarissa looked at him like she wanted to scream, but she didn't deny it. She couldn't. She gasped, almost childlike. You're ruining everything. I locked eyes with her. No. You ruined it when you turned our marriage into leverage. I leaned back, not to distance myself, just to let the last blow land clean. You wanted power, so you weaponized intimacy. You used our finances like your own private vault and our marriage like camouflage, all while pretending you were seeking freedom. I nodded toward John. Well, You got it. John stiffened. You can have her, I said. Just know what you're really getting. Clarissa stood up now, furious, face contorted. You think this makes you strong? You think being cold and calculated makes you better than me? I rose calmly. No. What makes me better is I never lied about who I was. I turned to John, whose confidence had finally cracked at the edges. And you, be careful. She's not done rewriting her version of events. You're just the next chapter. She'll edit you out too. Eventually. He didn't answer. His eyes were on the affidavit, like it had started to glow. Clarissa looked at the documents, at me, then back at John. Are you seriously going to let him do this? She snapped. He shook his head, but not at me. Her. I don't even know who you are right now, he muttered. That did it. That was the moment she realized she'd already lost. Not because I yelled. Not because I threw things or screamed or collapsed into self-pity. But because I did what she never expected. I watched. I waited. I documented. And now I ended it on my terms. No courtroom theatrics. No social media spectacle. Just 3 pages. And an empty house. As I turned to leave, I paused at the doorway. The lawyer will contact you both later today, I said. I won't. Clarissa looked like she wanted to lunge across the table, but her feet didn't move. John sat like someone waiting for a bus that already passed. And me? I walked out into the morning light. My future wasn't clear, but it was mine. And theirs? Well, they could sort through the paperwork. Together. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. Didn't wait for a parting insult or last-ditch plea. There was no victory speech. No final monologue to drive home the point. Just the quiet click of wood meeting frame and the weight of finality hanging in the air behind me like a closing curtain. The sky was still that soft gray blue of early morning. The kind of light where everything looks a little washed out. Like even the world wasn't ready for what just happened. I walked to the truck. Climbed in. Started the engine. The same truck I used to drive Clarissa to doctor's appointments, family trips, late-night Target runs because she forgot one thing. Funny. That same truck now carried the last version of me she'd ever know. The man who saw everything, said nothing, and burned the script from inside the stage. I sat there for a moment, engine humming. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the draft I'd scheduled the night before. A simple message. No punctuation. No flourish. Check the safe. I hit send. Then I put the phone face down in the console and drove away. Not fast. Not triumphant. Just steady. 1 block. Then 2. Then out of the neighborhood she'd soon have to explain herself in. Back inside the house. She was screaming at John. Not the loud kind, not yet. But the sharp, panicked kind. Words spit between gasps. Her robe half open. Her face flushed with humiliation and fury. She was unraveling in real time, and John wasn't catching her. He was recoiling. Seeing her for the first time with the same clarity I'd earned the hard way. The text hit her phone. She blinked when it buzzed. Looked down. Confused. Then pale. Check the safe. Just 3 words. But she knew what safe I meant. The one in the back of my closet. Buried behind winter coats and old tax returns. She used to tease me about it. Said it was overkill for a man with no secrets. She ran upstairs. Fumbled with the combination. November 19th, 95. Our wedding date. She didn't even need to think about it. The door creaked open. No documents. No files. Just a small velvet box. Inside, a single object. It was her wedding ring, but it wasn't. The band had been melted. Recast. The stones removed. Ground down. Embedded into the head of a solid brass key. Not decorative. Functional. Heavy. Tied to it with a ribbon was a small tag. Typed. Centered. Crisp. For the freedom you wanted. You're welcome. She stared at it for a long time. Not crying. Not yelling. Just staring. She'd spent a year building an escape hatch. She didn't realize I'd built the door. John walked into the room, eyes darting from the safe to her hands. What is that? She didn't answer. She just dropped the key on the floor and backed away like it burned. And maybe it did. Back in the truck, I turned onto the highway. The sun broke the horizon just as I merged into the eastbound lane. I didn't feel joy, didn't feel grief. What I felt was something else entirely. Something she'll never understand. Something earned. Closure. Forged in silence. Delivered without mercy. And sealed with a key she'll never use.